Good morning, everybody. My name is Tim Fairhurst from ETOA. I'm the Director of Policy there, and I'm joined by our colleague Ramon van der Storm, who is currently sitting inside Amsterdam, if you allow that people who live outside the ring road of Amsterdam are Amsterdammers. Ramon is also on ETOA's advisory council, and he runs Blue Boat Company in Amsterdam. So welcome, Ramon, and thank you very much for joining us in this conversation.
Well, thank you, my pleasure, and welcome to the rest of us.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining. I can see that we have about 40 attendees, and that number is growing. Because more than 80 people signed up, we'll just wait a few moments for more people to appear. But rather than waste your time, what I will do is I will show you some of the recent innovations that we at ETOA have been doing in the last few weeks on our website, if you haven't had a chance to have a look. And then after that, what we'll do is just give you a short update on some of the activities we've been engaging in this very difficult period. But then the purpose of this seminar is to hear from you through the question facility in the GoToWebinar control panel, so that you can tell us what's going on for you, what your perspectives are, what questions you have, so that at the end of this session, we've got a really good sense of what your priorities are and what you think is likely to happen in the coming few months. So we'll be making a habit of doing this. Thank you very much for joining us this morning, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say. So we've now got 50 odd attendees, so I'm going to now just show you ETOA's website. So hopefully the screen sharing will work. Ramon, perhaps you could confirm with me you can see ETOA's website now on the screen.
I can see the website on the screen. Yes, there is
So,
Mario, Tom, and Tim. So that's you.
Very good. So just on the website, if you go to, you can see at the top, etoa.org, Coronavirus Hub. This is a place where we've got some of the recent statements we've made. You can click into those. And there you go, there's a message from the chairman. And then lower down, you will see any other materials we've released recently. This banner here takes you to a much more detailed page where we've got resources for each country, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Lower down are the various webinars we're running, and then right at the bottom, we are hoping to start to build a library of features from members, and this could be anything from a useful tool that you've discovered that you think other people might want to share, any good news stories. So this bit down here for our members is very much for you to just use as a sharing space for any materials you think would be beneficial. So I think this is us trying to support as much collaboration and support as possible. And where there's some good news, of course, we would be very happy to share that. So let me quickly take you on a visit of the coronavirus page itself. So if I click on this banner in the hub, and this, there you can see last updates yesterday and the end of last week, just before Easter. This explains what we're doing, what our policy priorities are, and various resources we have grouped by multinational bodies such as the UN, United Nations. Down here, we've got more information, which is sharing some really excellent material produced by other NGOs. If you have a look in the UN, you will find a lot of material that will help anyone who's trying to sort of analyze where the pandemic is going. And let's just take Belgium, since we have some Belgian callers in. Here you go. We focus on all the information to do with financial support, health arrangements, and any travel restrictions. So those are the three areas of knowledge we focus on. So if anyone has information that we ought to share, very happy to do that. So I stopped the tour of the website because you all know how to navigate that. I'm now going to have a glass of water And perhaps I can just say a little bit about what ETOA has been doing in the last month or so since we've been locked down, and obviously our industry has been turned upside down. Our focus clearly now is on supporting our members as best we can through an extremely difficult time. That has meant, as a team, we have had to adjust ourselves. So all of our focus is on member support. We're not doing much business development now. We're not producing events like we normally do, but we are certainly planning events in the future. And we're very much in a place where we want to be part of a recovery. And that means working as well as we can, particularly with the public sector, in order that we prepare the ground as well as possible so that the recovery, when it comes, is stimulated in the correct way and supported. We do know that right now, the big priority is financial support, and that needs to happen urgently. And that's certainly been the basis of a lot of our policy activity. We have weekly calls with the European Commission, with other trade bodies in Brussels. The arrangements around refunds and cancellations in consequence of package travel arrangements are at the top of the agenda. And as you all know, within the European Union, there is national discretion as to what schemes are in operation, and there's a lot of discussion about what is most effective. But where there is absolute agreement is that without a very urgent and widespread cash injection, a lot of companies are at great risk, because without any cash coming in, all the payments throughout the supply chain are locked, they're not moving, and the ability to refund consumers is very limited. So government realizes that's urgent, but we'll be very interested to hear what you feel is going on in Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands with respect to government action, so that business is still here, so that it can support recovery. And I think one of the most positive and strong messages we have is, if you look at Europe's response to crises in the past, the travel and tourism industry has been right at the front of sectors that return employment to the economy very quickly. So it's essential we keep this very precious ecosystem of all the small businesses, as well as the larger businesses that are in our sector, that we keep them so they're there to provide employment and welcome visitors when the recovery comes. But what we would like to do, just to get the conversation started, is to invite you as the audience to give us your opinion as to what do you think the biggest challenges will be. So I'm just going to launch a new poll, and perhaps we'll give you a minute or so to think about your responses. So that poll is launching now. And Ramon, perhaps you can confirm with me if you can see that.
Mm. Yes, I see now three possible options. One, economic resources, cancellation and refunds, and retaining talent, as the three biggest challenges we have after the crisis.
So as we let that poll continue, and we've got about a third of people have voted now, Ramon, perhaps I could invite you to just offer some personal reflections on how you think government has responded in the Netherlands, which is obviously your area of expertise, in the sense of recognizing the nature of the industry and the kind of support which will be most practical in order that business can continue. So Ramon, over to you.
I think at the moment there isn't, in Holland, there isn't a real, let's say, business-wise support system. It's just a general support system. That's meaning that if your turnover has dropped by more than 20%, government will compensate you for your wages. And that means, in our case, for example, we have dropped 100% in turnover, that we will be compensated for 90% of the wages of our staff, which is a relief, of course, provided that we do not release them. And this will continue for about 3 months, and that certainly is a help. But there isn't real business-wise way of support from the government. So there isn't special policy for tourism industry as there is in France, for example, where travel agents, as I understand it, are not obliged to refund money already paid, but they they need to, let's say, to move the holiday to a later period in the year.
I think that's right. And one of the things you'll see, and I'm going to close this poll now because we have about 2/3 of people saying that economic resources and access to financial support, or at least is the most important issue. And just under 1/3 are saying cancellations and refunds, with 4% retaining talent. So I'll close that poll now, and that will provide the basis for our discussion for the next few minutes. So just to return to the question of different government support, one of the issues that's very clear from a European Union perspective is that there is not a consistent approach across various governments. So from an ETOA perspective, if we look across the piece, so for example, Denmark is being held up as a country that has got a very simple and effective form of business support, so that all of the liability to the consumers in respect of cancellations is provided by government, so that business is not exposed in the same way. Not all countries offer support in the same way. Some countries are resistant to the idea of vouchers being offered instead of refunds, because that is effectively breaking the consumer contract in the first place. But take Italy as an example. There's strong recognition that without a voucher program, businesses will fold because they're not in a cash position to provide the refunds needed. So urgent access to liquidity is well understood, but what's very interesting and very difficult for industry is that all countries have taken a different approach. So it's very hard if your income comes from different markets and your liabilities are in different markets, how you can manage your various debtors and creditors in any sort of efficient way. So I think it's an example where there is not one single model in Europe, even though package travel was intended to be a maximum harmonization instrument in the first place. So one of the learnings, it's very clear to us for the European Commission, and there's been very clear recognition there, that we need to look at the governance system of tourism very closely, so that this sort of fragility is not seen again should a similar crisis occur. Just going to look to see if we've got any questions from our attendees on this. So limited numbers of questions so far. So perhaps, Ramon, I can ask you to reflect, just talking to other colleagues in industry. Yours is a family business, and there are many family businesses and independent businesses throughout the industry. I think Europe, unlike, for example, the United States, is very small business heavy in the tourism industry. So if we look at the hotel sector, approximately 30% of the hotels in Europe are branded, but 70% are independent or family run. What's your perception of the ecosystem, all the coach operators out there? You speak for canal cruises and are very close to the attraction sector. All the people who, historically would have had lots of visitors from all around the world, and perhaps not so much focusing on a domestic market. What are they thinking? What are they talking about as you start to look ahead past the lockdown?
The difficult thing about the whole situation is that although it seems much longer, it's only in Holland, it's just a month. So it's 5 weeks now. We are now in let's say, the intellectual lockdown, and there are no tourists around. And when I spoke to people in the first place, in the first week after the lockdown, then everyone was, all right, we'll catch up later with the season. Now I think that's getting more difficult, especially as Keukenhof couldn't open. There are signs it will take longer than let's say by the end of May or middle May perhaps. So I haven't really spoken to many people since then. But in the first fall, everyone was, well, let's say, as you say in Dutch, gelaten. You can understand that one, the rest can. So it will pass, and it will pass, no doubt. But in what way and when and how it will return, that's the difficult question, I think.
And when you hear any sort of government discussion, Is it the case that the travel and tourism sector is seen as unusually fragile or something that's really integral to the recovery, or is it seen as a little apart? You know, where does travel and tourism sit, you know, in your perception in terms of priorities?
Mm-hmm. Well, it is generally known that the travel business is hit very hard by this. That's what's officially said by government, and you hear from politicians, and so that's fact, and it's acknowledged by politicians. The whole problem is that, as I hear from some politicians around, that they think, well, when we start again, when the ban is locked, when bars are open again, when shops are open again, tourists will come automatically. So then we will be back where we were before the lockdown. And I don't think they realize it will take about years for people to come back. I very much doubt, for example, if the United States travel will regain this year, and the same applies to the Far East. So I don't think people really understand. Let's say government doesn't really understand that it will take months, if not years, to be back on the level where we were by say the beginning of the year.
So I think that's a very strong point, that we need to our planning horizon for recovery this is not weeks and months. We're looking at 18 months plus, and 2022 is going to be the first normal year. Is probably a pragmatic planning horizon, but nevertheless there will be some kind of recovery and some sort of business coming in earlier. And I think one of the questions that you and I have discussed is echoed by one of the questions that's been submitted. So I'll read out a question. So thank you for submitting it. Our biggest worry, says the questioner, is that post-corona period, how do you run group travel in a 1.5 meter society? And this certainly picks up something that you and I discussed in preparation, that a lot of people are providing services where typically you are closer together. How is this going to drive product innovation, service provision? Are people going to be having separate rooms for breakfast for their groups? What do you imagine is going to happen? What sorts of conversations are going on?
I heard from a restaurant in Amsterdam that completely stripped down its large dining room, and they redirected into small conversions, cubicles for 2 persons each. So therefore, people can still, when they reopen, can still have dinner there, but of course with fewer people. And there is a question, of course, of how staffing will be. Are you obliged to pick up the food yourself, or are there some waiters still willing to go there? I did a poll yesterday with some of the canal operators in Amsterdam, and as I look for the large operators, the boats that we operate, for example, we can run with a 1.5 meter economy, but with 30 people on board of a boat instead of the normal 70 or 80. For the open boats, it's about 10 people, 10, 15 people, while there are normally about 44. And for the small saloon steamers, it will be only 3 people, where you normally have 12 or 15. So we need to develop, and we can operate like that. That's not the problem. The thing is that the cost of the boat won't be reduced. So they will stay the same, but with 1/3 of the people normally on board of the boat. So that means either we need to increase the rates, neither we need to economize on something. And that's the way we need to work around.
I understand, and that you've obviously got a very clear sort of logistic answer given the shape and structure of the vessels you work with. We've been asked a more general question from Roland. You know, will group travel actually be prohibited for a long time? So that would be a nightmare scenario for people who focus particularly on the group sector. Has there been any discussion that group tourism in particular is one that's going to be hard to manage in the period as we sort of implement a social loosening of control and society starts getting back to normal? Will group travel in particular be under particular restrictions, do you think?
I think it will. I think, well, on the other hand, KLM is still, well, when they are still flying, there is no 1.5 meter restriction on board. But you need to get your food yourself from. It's actually on your chair when you get in. It isn't really at the moment the topic of discussion. There are questions, of course, on how are we going to manage with public transport once the 1.5 meter economy is in charge. And I think discussions for group tourism will be in the same line of that discussion. So I'm not quite sure yet. It's not really a topic at the moment here. Everyone is contemplating it, but you can't really see it back in newspapers. And well, what we discussed yesterday, what we discussed with other people, is that I think what now really strikes us is that tourism isn't really a point of political interest or government interest in the Netherlands. It's more a geological one. But as long as there are only 2 civil servants working full time on tourism in the Netherlands, it states the importance of this industry for government. I think an interesting thing, which is slightly on the line, but it's that people really struck hard in Amsterdam, is that now Amsterdam will get 125 million euros less of tourism tax this year, and I think that significates the size of importance for tourism. Well, at least for Amsterdam, but also for the Netherlands. And I think the abundance of that importance, or the knowledge of that importance at the moment, is the answer that no one has really thought about how group tourism will work after this.
I think that's a very tough challenge. And certainly as regards the recognition of the financial impact of the travel and tourism industry, certainly going from our discussions with national government and particularly at an EU level, there is no question at all that where perhaps in the past we were overconfident and complacent, sure, tourism will just come. Europe is a fantastic place. The business will keep rolling in. And obviously we started to see some hostility towards tourism in some of the rhetoric around over-tourism. That has now gone. The narrative has changed. And perhaps the opportunity now is a reset. So we need to say, okay, that was then, this is now. How will we rebuild and how will we integrate travel and tourism properly into strategic planning at a political level in order that the whole ecosystem is more robust and it's better integrated into city planning and so forth, so that, now we're all working at home. Perhaps we do not all need to use public infrastructure at the same time to go to work. And actually our cities can be optimized more efficiently so that visitors and the local community can use the same space and spread out in a better way. So do you think the current situation is going to help us rethink how we share our spaces? And is there room for a bit of political openness and discussion in this area? Do you see any grounds for optimism there?
Well, I'm always an optimist. So yes, I do see some reason for optimism. But I think at the moment it's simply too early to say anything about this. Especially here in Holland, we have news about more or less, perhaps releasing the measurements of the intellectual lockdown by next week, and then you can start making plans again. But I think that's for me personally the most discomforting situation of part of this whole situation, that you can't really make plans because you don't know what you need to plan.
And that picks up on something we're hearing from tour operators based in North America and elsewhere, that essentially Europe in general needs to be better at providing external information so that when people can say, okay, Europe is open, you can start booking again, at what point will the internal Schengen borders be open again? We desperately need some coordinated information there. We're hearing that loud and clear from markets around the world, and that's certainly something that's been recognized in Brussels. I'd like to bring in another question which has been submitted from one of our participants, and it relates to product innovation, and the next poll we submit here will invite all participants to have their opinion. But just to get the conversation started, so to what extent do you see product owners open to innovation, to refine their product offering versus just wanting to recover to the pre-COVID-19 marketing? So, how are people going to change their marketing and change their product? And do you think there's a difference in approach between the chains and the independents in that sense? So any reflections on that before we invite a wider participation?
I think my opinion as well relates to what you just said about group tourism, that you will shift all your attention to the individual travelers and make them interesting overstay of country views. Anyway, that makes it interesting to come to Amsterdam or to whatever place you are in. I think people also will be very innovative with, as I just said, how, well, for example, for us, how many people can fit a boat, but the same will do for Heineken experience, for example. How can you make the experience whilst keeping 1.5 meters? If you have a look at the restaurants in Amsterdam at the moment, they are quite creative in either bring food to people or just opening for takeaway. That's kind, I think, of innovation you will get. However, it will be very challenging to keep a distance of 1.5 meters from each other when you are in a confined space, whatever attraction that is.
It will indeed. And I think one of the questions that you and I have talked about is, so what the product is one thing, but obviously who the audience is another. And there seems to be a general consensus around Europe that domestic markets are going to be where the recovery comes from to begin with. And obviously that will have an impact on product development. When we had a similar discussion in Barcelona recently, it was very clear that, for example, a guiding company that historically has focused on clients from outside Spain is now changing its approach and developing a new suite of products intended for the domestic audience. And from our perspective, I mean, that's obviously a smart pivot to the domestic market, but it's actually very encouraging for long-haul markets, many of whom want to buy products and services that the domestic audience really want themselves. So they don't want something that, as it were, is just made for tourists. They want something that is something that local people would also enjoy. So perhaps there's an interesting product stimulus there as well. So I'm going to launch the next poll. So if I can invite everybody to have a vote. This is inviting you to consider, is it the case whether industry will focus on domestic and nearby markets and in the context of recovery? Will product be focused on domestic and nearby markets? So is there going to be some sort of adaptation? So instead of the product that was previously there, it's something that's in some way better adapted or more adapted for a domestic and nearby market. So, the nearby parts of Germany for the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, Holland, France, all of the countries, very easy day trip from each other. How will this impact? And the last question, long-haul markets will want different products. This is really just to, in a very preliminary way, see if we in Europe think it's the case that our counterparts all around the world who send visitors to Europe perhaps will be looking for different things. Will consumer sentiment change a little bit? Will the crowded hotspots be less appealing? Will people be looking for different things? So just to get a sense of whether you think that long-haul markets will want different products. So we've had pretty good participation. I'll leave that open for now, but about 2/3 of you have voted. So it seems pretty clear. So 83% of you think that industry will focus on domestic and nearby markets, and 60% think that the product will also reflect that focus, or just falling below 60% now. And about 15% think there may be some noticeable change in what long-haul markets want. So perhaps we can spend the last 15 minutes or so exploring what some of this might mean. So Ramon, your initial reaction, 85% of the industry want to focus on domestic, about 60% of product will focus on domestic. In practical terms, what do you think that will mean for your business, for example?
That will mean that we will probably draw the attention of people from the other parts of Holland and from Germany and from Belgium to the attraction of Amsterdam and the surrounding areas of Amsterdam. I mean, Amsterdam itself is very popular and doesn't really need any more promotion. But the surrounding areas of Amsterdam, let's say Waterland, Muiden, is very is not well known by other people, by Belgians, for example, by Germans. So I think we will start packaging canal tours together with other products like that. An interesting thing about the last thing, about the 15%, that I think the long haul market will ask for different products. I think there was proof that, don't think you need to worry about that one, that there were last weekend, there were still Chinese spotted in the bulb fields around Lisse and in Hillegom. So there are still some Chinese around in Holland, and they still are looking at the tulips. So I think that will stay the same. But what will change is that we need to do two things. We need to, let's say, give back, to put it politically, the touristic hotspots to the Dutch, or to the Belgium and the Germans, and need to redevelop our products that they are, although they are meant to tourists, like cheese, for example. The cheese is still a Dutch product and very interesting for Dutch people as well. There were, I think last weekend it was as well, that the parking at the South of Schans was closed, not because there were so many tourists, but people from Holland now finally took that challenge to go to South of Schans, because normally it's so crowded there with other people. And I think that's the way of development you will see.
And I think that sort of reflection is echoed in other markets. We've got a few more interesting questions, and I'll just perhaps read out a few of them and just give you a chance to think. So one very nice reflection from someone who, it's not a question, but it's certainly a very welcome contribution to the debate, is that this is an organization which is a newcomer to inbound travel based in the Netherlands, who says that the crisis may help companies like us who are new and small to be better appreciated. But an interesting observation inside it, saying most of the sellers, like hotels, overlook us and can't seem to be bothered by small companies. We were doing very well, and 2020 was considered to be the record year. This crisis might provide a reality check, and small businesses like us might get the benefit. And I guess you'd probably agree with that anyone who's in a position to bring clients is going to be welcome. So if you're a small business, but you have getting some clients from somewhere, you are certainly going to get attention from suppliers. So I think that's certainly an interesting observation, and anyone who's effective at finding clients is going to find willing suppliers, that's for sure. One observation about 2020 is, let's say, and this is from Miriam. So Miriam, thank you for your question. And she says our biggest concern is about season 2020. Even if the borders are open in, say, June, our high season is July, August, and September. We think people are not really coming in these months. So it's a very low season until Easter 2021. So the question for us is, how can we hold on for an entire year? And I guess, that's not a happy prospect, but is that a point of view that you think is more widely felt by people in the supply chain and in the operators?
Oh yes, absolutely. I do think so. It's, for example, the tulip season is one of the highlights of the season. That's when you make, let's say, it won't say 50. Well, some companies do make 50% of the turnover, and indeed Keukenhof makes 100% of their turnover in that period. So if you lose that part of your season, it's very hard, at least to get a normal season. And the longer the longer this goes on, and the fewer people are coming, the more difficult it gets to work to get through to the next year. And I think that is the real challenge for every one of us. That how can we possibly keep alive or survive till next year? Tourists will come eventually, and no, there won't be that much. It will be difficult, as we said, about 18 months to pick up again. But how are we going to bridge this 18 months? And that's the real challenge we need to make, or we are facing at the moment.
So just to get into specifics about origin markets, so it's clear that people are going to be looking at the domestic and the nearby markets. But we have a question from Jessica who asks, thank you, Jessica, for your question. Would you think tourists from China will be the first recovery group to visit Europe? And how soon will that happen? Is there any advice for attracting them to the Netherlands? So any initial reactions on, I know, you don't hold yourself as an absolute expert on China outbound, but what are you hearing? What's your sense on that? And perhaps I can share some reflections that we've had from some of our members like Europass and Dragon Trail as well. So Ramon, China, is that
well,
going to be the first?
Well, I do not know that much from Chinese market. That's quite fair. But I do know that they're not coming just for Holland, and they're coming for Europe. So let's say if Holland is open again, that won't necessarily mean that the Chinese are coming again. For that, they need to go to Germany, they need to go to France, and they need to go to Belgium, to this specific part, let's say the northern part of Europe. As long as the northern part of Europe isn't open, then the Chinese won't travel, provided there is airlift. As long as there are hardly any flights from KLM, for example, to China, and there is no real clearance about how people will react to this 1.5 meter economy, they can't simply come, or it will be very difficult for them to come. But it's not. So it's a complicated thing, and that's the thing, as you correctly said. That's some fun up. That's some fun. Yeah, that's the problem now. That's one of the things that we need a European solution. You can open one border, but you need to open the other borders as well. And you can open a border, but as long as your restaurants and bars are still closed and there are no hotels and all measurements, there's no point in opening again. And that's also, as we earlier said, the problem with the understanding of local politicians or local or national politicians, that you are not just there by reopening cafes, for example. So that makes it. I think that makes it very difficult. And as we say, for the Chinese, well, yeah, Chinese may start traveling again, but Indians, no idea. I think Japan will be very, very difficult, as they are always very cautious in traveling around. And no idea about the United States, but it doesn't look very good.
Thank you. I think from the point of view of China outbound, we know from our colleagues that hotel bookings inside China are starting to pick up, internal travel restrictions are picking up, and we know from a survey that Europass put out last week that in the younger age groups and more of the FIT perhaps age group, that they are considering Europe again as a possible destination. So there are just the beginnings of some grounds for optimism, and we will be running webinars in a few weeks' time where we start to dig deeper into origin market sentiment. But I think your point's very clear that it's sensible to think in terms of 12, 18 months recovery cycle. This is not going to be immediate, and government planning needs to take this into account in order to make sure the industry is still there. This is an industry, after all, that employs about 12% or provides about 12% of EU employment. This is not something you can take for granted. And once small businesses go, it's very hard to get them back. I'd like to just walk through some more questions, and some of those particularly relate to hotels and the hospitality sector and also the vouchers. So a question from Franklin, thank you for your question. The doubt and failing to take a clear decision about the Corona voucher regarding cancellations is obviously an acute issue. Do we have concrete news about the EU regulations on Corona vouchers? Some countries call them legal, while others say they violate the EU regulations. Franklin, if I can just offer a quick observation on that. I think the issue is that it really is a matter of national discretion what member states do in what is termed exceptional circumstances. So it's not really whether or not they're breaking the package travel directive rules. They certainly are going outside those, but they're allowed to in exceptional circumstances. I think one of the big debates, and it's really about interpretation, is exactly in what ways and what conditions these sorts of alternative arrangements like vouchers for future travel or delayed repayment, how may these be integrated into the package travel directive interpretation. So there is some debate about across Europe about exactly what the package travel directive allows you to do. Meanwhile, member states have just made unilateral decisions that they need to come up with a financial rescue package, which also addresses liabilities surrounding package travel cancellation. So it since there are two tracks, there's the national track and there's the EU track. And at the moment, the EU track is really discussing whether there can possibly be a one size fits all, which is ironic since the package travel directive, which is the second one we've had, dated from 2013, was intended to minimize the national variation. And the irony is now we're seeing a lot of national variation and it's causing a lot of difficulty. So Franklin, thank you for raising that point. I'll just go through a few more just so we make sure we surface as many of the questions we can. Remarks from Marion at Visit Luxembourg. Thank you, Marion, for contacting us. She also reflects that the focus is on helping the hospitality sector now rather than necessarily preparing for a post-COVID-19 tourism. So it's still a discussion to be had about what tourism will look like after the crisis. So planning not yet on the agenda, but clearly that's something that we should consider. Great question from Edo, and Ramon, you may want to respond to this one since you're not a hotelier. Do you think it's realistic, asks Edo, that local people will stay in, for example, 4- and 5-star hotels? Is that going to happen?
Well, never say never. But I think it depends. I think it depends on the.
I guess.
It depends. I think on the rate the hoteliers offer. You have in Amsterdam, you have the Hotelnacht every year, which is well correctly pronounced as Hotel Night, and that enables people from especially Amsterdam, but also from the Netherlands, if you like, to stay on a discounted rate in a hotel. So yes, that may be, but then the question is, why should you stay in a hotel when you have a home in Amsterdam for more than one night? If you put it like a domestic travel, that people from Groningen are coming to Amsterdam, yeah, that may increase. But I think it still is a question of rate-related things. We are Dutch anyway, so it shouldn't be too expensive.
Okay, so another hotel-related question, which perhaps is addressed to ETOA, from Will Howes. Thanks for your question, Will. He asks, will you be reaching out to independent hotels to set up packages and work together, especially in rural areas? And that, I think, brings together a lot of the themes we're discussing, that perhaps one of the beneficiaries of this crisis will be tourism away from the busy cities. And clearly there's a very big ecosystem of smaller hotels, independent hotels in rural Luxembourg, Belgium, Netherlands also. Do you think that this might be an opportunity for more non-urban tourism as people start to develop new product for the domestic and nearby markets? Traditionally, lots of Dutch people will go to the neighboring countries for camping and so forth. Will this develop, or will the camping shift to hotels for people who are maybe not going on urban breaks but are looking for more rural holidays? And any sort of instinctive reaction to that?
I think yes. I think it may be. I think maybe that people are avoiding crowds, or at least partly avoiding crowds, and stay outside bigger, larger cities, and stay somewhere around in rural sites in the countryside. But they still will visit let's say the cities for their museums and their attractions and perhaps the restaurants. But I think I think that may be a development that will grow. It is already slightly here in Amsterdam or in the Netherlands due to the spreading tourism around the country. People staying in Rotterdam, going to Amsterdam. Rotterdam is, I know, a big city as well. But people staying in the countryside somewhere around Utrecht, it's roughly the same as you already have for years in England when you are staying in a hotel far outside London and still going to London for a day. That perhaps may be a development.
Okay, so a few more questions, and we have hit the 45 minutes, but all of these other webinars have gone on towards 60. So if anyone is already planning to leave us now, of course you are free to leave us, and please do keep checking in on the etoa.org website, because there will be more of these events, and we'll be very pleased to welcome you. And there are ways of contacting us via the website if you've got any further observations. But
well, we've lost 4 so far, so we are still pretty on.
we're okay. So Ramon, with your agreement, let's go on for another 15 minutes because we've still got lots of questions, and I think they're really taking us to a very interesting survey of the current situation. So there's a question directly for you, Ramon, from Fabien Lindner, excuse me, from Rotterdam Partners. Good morning, Fabien. And question for you, Ramon, is when do you think we can slowly start up our mutual acquisition activities, so national and international? So over to you, Ramon.
Well, it puts you in a very interesting position to be the lookalike to Mark Rutte, but I think it's very hard to say. But if you look at it by small things, for example, the small signs of in society. If I look at my own office, people are actually fleeing away from home because they can't stand it anymore. So they come back to the office once, twice a week. I think if you social, let's say, convenience will be very hard to keep people indoors and let them working at home for longer than, let's say, by the end of June. If restaurants and bars should be closed by any longer than the 1st of June, I think that half of the restaurants and bars will go bankrupt. So there should be, and I think most of the parents of young children are being driven mad by their children at home all day, and they long to the moment that the schools are starting again. So I think that we now have 28th of April which is the day after King's Day. Will be the day, is now be put as, let's say, the point of the horizon where measurements will be loosened. I think that will be prolonged till 6th of May or the 11th of May, being the 5th of May, the national holiday, Liberals Day. And as I'm not having children myself, but I believe that's also a school holiday. So that will be 11th of May will be the first day after school holiday. I hope that will be the first day that some of the measurements will be loosened.
Okay. I mean, we certainly heard in the news today, I think that Denmark primary schools are starting to open again. So it's going to be interesting to see the different policies across Europe. And again, it's an integration question, to what extent people will look at the neighbors and say, what's different to you? Why is it okay to do something in Denmark and not okay to do it in Germany? And all of these issues about common standards are going to, I'm sure, be addressed. And certainly the UNWTO has been doing some very interesting work on this, and we will be putting some material from them on our website tomorrow. A couple more questions, Ramon. And the first one is really about sort of price and position, and that's from our colleague Peter at Amstor. So in addition to people wanting to travel, clients are going to want to cut the rates to survive. Suppliers want to raise the rates to survive. So even if we all overcome this crisis, will travel become a luxury good instead of a commodity? So do you think it's going to change?
Well, I think there's every chance it will. Looking at the thing, as we said, for example, for the canal boat, and I'm absolutely sure that's the question why Peter asked it. We reduced the capacity of the boat by 60-70%, while costs remain the same. You should get your money from some point. I think it still applies for airplanes. If airplanes the number of flights are limited between any destination whatsoever, or the number of people being carried on the plane is limited, costs will remain the same. So I'm not saying it will happen, but it may happen that it will do something in the race. And that's a difficult part, of course, because on the one hand side, we are asked by our clients to reduce rates to make a very attractive offer for their clients to offer the trip to Amsterdam, to Europe, or to Holland or whatever. And we, on the other hand, are faced with, in the best way, the same level of costs we have, but no income over the last year. So I think that will be I think we need some interesting discussions to make in the course of this year.
Interesting discussions we're not short of, and I think what's going to be interesting is to see what decisions may come from the discussions. A couple more observations and then questions. So Johan Schersten, from Lingo Tours offers the following observation about American groups traveling to Europe. So the ones that they're seeing are asking to postpone until next year, and it's unlikely they'll have any groups for this year. And when the groups come back next year, we expect them to want the same things: Kokenhof, Eiffel Tower, you know, the obvious highlights. So that's what they're seeing. They're not currently seeing a change in appetite. So versus our previous question, they're anticipating similar product requirements from the US, but not traveling until next year. So hi, Johan, thanks very much for getting in touch. From our colleague Jan, who is from Visit Flanders, and he observes that regarding package travel, Germany is definitely raising the issue with the EC, as well it would, since TUI, of course, you know, one of the Europe's greatest companies in the travel sector, you know, is a company who can sort of articulate in great detail just how complicated the supply chain is, from consumer to all the various aspects of the tourism industry, and that is also a German-based company, and are certainly pressing for a voucher-based solution to the current cash flow crisis. Great observation from Eric, who I guess is from Brussels. Certainly the question relates to Brussels. So good morning, Eric. Thanks for your question. And he observes that rather than lowering the rates, we want to upgrade the experience by offering combined product offers. For example, we want to offer a chocolate workshop whilst visiting the Atomium. And I think that sort of brings into play this whole idea of value adding. And certainly one of ETOA's biggest arguments about the value that industry brings is it's through combining product that we're adding value. So very interesting observation from Eric. Ramon, do you think that there will be more value adding? Will people get more creative about combining product in order to make things look more appealing, and so that industry can add more value through creative product development and design? Is that going to happen?
Yeah, certainly. That's because you need to attract, well, as you said, you need to attract people who are normally not coming. You're not attracting your usual customers, and you need to attract a new audience, or people who aren't likely to go to your product, to your hotel, your restaurant, your attraction. And the other thing, of course, is that suppose we only have travelers from the Netherlands in the moment, that there are 17 million inhabitants in the Netherlands, whilst the number of tourists in Amsterdam only is 17 million a year. That should mean that everyone living in the Netherlands, including the people from Amsterdam, should go to Amsterdam as a tourist. It's not very likely that will happen. So therefore, we need the same number of products and the same number of suppliers, attractions, museums, restaurants for, no, not only a few, but an enormous number of lesser people. So you should make yourself more attractive. You should make yourself more interesting for the limited number of clients you have. So yes, it will certainly create a whole lot of innovation in product.
No, I think product innovation is definitely coming, and it's certainly something that we're seeking to support as much as possible. Just on the various sectors, Jan from Flanders also asked the question, is the Netherlands taking any measures regarding the event sector in particular? So have you heard any discussions about the very valuable MICE sector, so not just leisure tourism, but all the big conferences, incentives and events?
Well, there was some disturbance about that in the beginning. It was officially said first that it was prohibited to organize an event for more up to 100 people. Later, it transpired that it was only for those events they were for which you need a license. But then already most of the events were cancelled. And with the events, the other problem, of course, is still that you have the 1.5 meter rule. So even if you are able to organize an event, you need to put 1.5 meter between the people, and it officially still is prohibited. And that's a little bit unclear about the rules in Holland at the moment, to have a gathering of more than 3 people, provided you're a family.
I understand. So I think perhaps the question was also getting at whether that particular part of the sector is going to be subject to government support in the same way that, if you like, conventional leisure tourism, which we represent, is subject to government support. So has there been discussion about the need to look after the events, conferences sector as well, so that when businesses start to book their conferences and incentives again, the infrastructure is still there?
Well, as we said at the beginning of this webinar, there is no particular policy for any business in Holland at the moment. It's just a general policy that reimburses you for your loss of turnover. So that also applies for the event business. Koninklijke Horeca Nederland is having discussions with the ministry about it, but I haven't heard anything that there's a real, let's say, made to measure policy for events or large businesses.
Okay, that's clear. Some general questions in the last few minutes we have, and a couple I can deal with quickly. So Xavier Abuelo asks, can ETOA provide any legal advice for companies on dispute of payments and debts? And Xavier, the answer to that is that we can certainly connect you with advice, and we can provide some insight and guidance ourselves. But I think your question illustrates that this is the single most difficult factor that businesses are dealing with. So how we can find a way of sorting out our mutual debts within the supply chain in a way that is not going to push up legal costs, and is going to maintain relationships in the future. So, you know, how we solve conflict, particularly around money, is something we're going to have to get very good at. And by all means, contact us for an informal discussion, and we can connect you with legal expertise if you need it. A comment from Jake Bergqvist. Jake asks us, you know, and he's speaking from the perspective of an OTA, that, and he says they're walking a fine line at the moment between trying to make new partnerships as much as possible so they can be ready for the recovery, and acknowledging that you know, new partners have other challenges to attend to at this time. And you know, he asks a supplementary question: when will people be ready to focus on the future? So, you know, from your perspective, you know, if people are picking up the phone in your office, if people are making inquiries about new business, is that welcome? When are people
Yes.
ready to talk about the future?
No, actually, we are talking about future products already, and there is a future, we no doubt. The only snack is when is it starting, and that's the thing. But we are looking ahead. We are looking for next year. We are developing new products, as I'm quite sure everyone who's watching this broadcast is doing. The only problem is that you don't know when to start, and what are the restrictions you are probably faced with, and that's the problem. But everyone is welcome to pick up the phone and call us, and call, I think, everyone looking here at the moment to discuss the future and future products and partnerships. Okay,
you heard it here first, everybody. Another very good reflection from Eric. Partnerships are the way forward, he says. Costs can be lowered, spread will be bigger, and the experience better, and benefits mutual. And I think that sort of picks up on a general theme we've been discussing, that, you know, even though we work in a very competitive industry, and, you know, we get round the table and we talk with our competitors about the business environment all the time. And I think the travel industry is very good and collegial in that sense. But we're in a particularly collegial time at the moment, that people are really working out how to partner and survive, how best to support each other. And competition right now is a subordinate to collaboration. So do you think there will be some sort of cultural change when the wheels of commerce start turning again? Will culturally we be doing more collaboration and looking for opportunities to partner in a greater way than we've done in the past? Do you think that's going to happen? Yeah. Although, of course, we are working closely together with many partners, and we as in a sector, not as we as in Blue Boat, but as we in a sector, there are partnerships already. You are helping each other out on trade fairs, on the large trade shows. So yes, that will get better. And there's always some room for improvement. And I think that some parties who may not have realized in the past that it's very important to work together as a branch or as a sector, that they now realize that
there is room for improvement in working together as well, all together. And many of the members of the sector already work together very closely. Some others didn't do so, and I think they now understand that it's vital for this whole sector to be united, also in our communication towards government and ministry, etc., if we act as one large industry. And I think that's something that will really gain us from this crisis. I hope so.
Thank you very much, Ramon. I'm going to have to draw this to a close since we've now reached noon Amsterdam time. But just to pick up on your remarks, I think that one of the partnerships that really does need to develop is the public sector, private sector partnership. And certainly that's something that, organizations like ETOA and its partners in Brussels and elsewhere, and particularly at a local level, whether it's working with the cities, Brussels, Rotterdam, Amsterdam, Paris, Luxembourg, can we do a better job between us of collaborating about what does success look like in tourism in a post-COVID-19 era, and how can we both work to make that more likely in a spirit of collaboration and partnership. So all the sort of antagonism about too much tourism and tourism being an unwelcome aspect of the economy, we need to reset that and collaborate in a good spirit in order that it is something that's welcome for the foreseeable future. But we now need to draw this discussion to a close. I have some thank yous to offer. First of all, I'd like to thank my colleague Aaron, who is behind the scenes coordinating this series of webinars, and he will make sure that this is something that people can see again via our website shortly. Ramon, thank you so much for your time this morning and for your insight as ever, as well as all your help behind the scenes on ETOA's Advisory Council. And thank you very much to all our participants and all your questions. I think we got to most of them. Apologies to those I did not, but from all of us at ETOA, stay well, and we look forward to seeing you on a screen or perhaps in an event sometime soon. Thank you very much.
En tot ziens.
Tot ziens.